Morning folks, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School, back in another video for our series, Gear of the 20th Century Woodsman. And today we're going to talk about compasses a little bit. We're not going to talk about one specific brand necessarily. We're going to talk about a few different brands, but we're going to talk about kind of the evolution of compasses in the 20th century that brought us to today, and some of the most popular models that were used mid-20th century that are really still in use today with very little modification. Stay with me. Okay, so when we look at compasses, we should go back a little bit to the beginning of the 20th century first and talk about this pocket watch style flip open compass. And this one is made by Warren Company, and it's just a floating needle that obviously points north and gives you 4 cardinal directions and the 45s. It does have degree readings around the outside of the bezel, but nothing really locks into place or anything like that. You have to float the compass around to get it where you want it, or point it in a certain direction and then figure out where north is and face yourself that direction. However, this one is marked 1910, Engineering Department, USA. That doesn't necessarily mean that it was an engineering department compass, because during the First World War and during the time period early when these compasses were purchased, they were bought by the engineering department of the United States military. So most of them, or a lot of them, were marked engineering department, but they could have been used by many different people within the U.S. military. They were also used by people like the Forest Service in the United States as well. But this type compass, this regular flip open watch style compass, was used primarily throughout the first part of the 20th century up until World War II, and actually into World War II as well, before more modern development or more accurate developments came about. And so that's what we'll talk about next. Now this style compass, which was an early model, probably from the early or mid 40s, I would guess, probably World War II version. This was made by Plan Limited is the name of the company, and it's in Switzerland. So this is a Swiss manufactured compass, and it has a floating bezel ring on it, or a floating disc inside of it, excuse me, and a movable bezel ring with a needle on it that you can dial in bearings. It has an aim point and a small metal mirror on it here that has to be polished to be able to see the degree readings. But this was your early style compass like that was used by both the military and woods professionals. This is a very, very complex style compass for that time period, and it's one of the reasons it's in my collection. It's one of my absolute favorite compasses. It's a very early compass of this style. Now, getting further into the period of the 40s and 50s, the military began to use compasses like this during World War II, and this was an engineering Linsatic style compass, exactly the same as what I just showed you, with a few improvements. It's a little bit lighter in weight of metal. It has a magnifying glass that you can look down to read the bezel ring, very much like a modern Kamenga has, and the same sighting line device that modern Kamenga compasses have. And this would have been a World War II style compass. And this one says Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army, 1944, manufactured by Superior Magneto in New York, USA. So this would have been the style compass that a woodsman would have carried as well. If he were using surplus type gear, he would have used this type equipment. Now you can look on places that sell compasses anywhere on the internet that you can find used compasses, and you will find lots of compasses that look just like this, exactly, that are made from both metal and made from plastic, that were made in Japan, especially up to, or especially during the 50s and 60s. And I think Japan was kind of like the modern day China as far as replication, OEMing products to different companies. You can find 15 different compasses that look exactly like this with different boxes for different companies that were selling this compass, and they all look exactly the same out of the box. They were all made in Japan. This one, again, was made in the USA, but compasses like this were made for a long period of time after these were used in the war for outdoorsmen and for outdoor use. Okay, so moving forward a little bit, as I said, this would have been the type of compass that a woodsman would have probably had. Most likely were he using some kind of surplus compass all the way up into the 50s and 60s, unless he bought a more modern version of a compass created later on. And there are some sporting type compasses that were produced in that time period of the 50s, 60s, early 70s. And one of them is this Leupold Sportsman compass. And it's just a very simple design compass that, again, has degree readings on the outside, but you can't move the bezel ring. It points north. It's spinning around right now because it's on top of a piece of metal probably. When I pick it up, it'll stop. There's metal underneath this table. But this is a very robust pot metal case, and this compass was probably made in the late 60s. So it would have just been something that you could, again, find general direction. You could adjust the compass to a certain degree reading and walk to it, but it didn't have a very good way to aim it or anything like that, and you couldn't move the bezel ring to actually dial in a reading. But these compasses, very much like the older style watch compasses that were just a compass rosette with some degree readings on them, were popular up to that point as well. Now, companies like Marbles actually made smaller rosette style compasses in brass cases that would point north and just had the 4 directions on them. And they were just an orienteering type compass to make sure that you didn't lose your way in the woods if you were traveling in a certain direction. You could walk a fairly straight line by clipping this to the lapel of your jacket and looking down to make sure you were walking in the same direction. Companies like Silva made a compass called the Sportsman's compass. And this compass, I like these metal rings, and they started to do these metal rings. You can see the same metal ring on this Silva compass as well. And this is a Silva Pathfinder made for the Boy Scouts of America. But they also had Silva civilian models just like this that were made in the 60s. And this one has the same type metal bezel ring on it. It's not plastic, it's made out of aluminum that would move around, and it gave you a small compass that you could actually dial in a degree reading to the top of the compass and then rotate your body or orientate your body to get the needle in the north area of the doghouse underneath and orientate with this type of compass. It also had a rudimentary watch of sorts on the outside here to tell you what time of day it was by using the sun. So that was a very interesting compass, and it had a metal brass housing on it so that it was non-magnetic, and it had a small clip on it so you could clip it onto your lapel if you wanted to, outstretched like this, just like you had with this Marbles type compass, but this one was a little bit more complicated, had a little more bells and whistles on it. Again, this one was made by Silva, back when Silva was made in Sweden. This Silva, again, was the same style metal outer ring with degree readings on the bezel itself. This one was made for the BSA. It had a flat plate on it at this point so that you could lay this on the map to orienteer with that. And that was something that the military used also in their Lancet compasses going into the Vietnam era of the 60s and 70s. So we'll talk about that next. Before we get to that, I want to talk about this box compass real quick. This one is a new Sunto. But Silva actually made this compass for several years, and they changed the name of this compass several times during its lifespan. It was called, I think it was called the Woodsman at one point. It was called the Prospector at one point. I'm not sure what it's called today by Sunto, but basically it's just a matchbox style compass that opens up and a mirror drops down underneath to be able to see the bezel ring above, and it has a movable bezel ring with a doghouse. It's a very convenient style compass to use. You aim over the top. It has glow-in-the-dark things here so that you can use it at night if you need to. But this compass has been used or sold by Silva and Sunto now since the 60s was maybe the first ad, maybe even the 50s. I saw ads for this compass. I'm going to put some of those ads on this video so that you can see those ads. But this is not a new style compass, even though it's newly sold now, just like this. It's a very old style compass that was made by Silva at one point, is now made by Sunto. So as we moved into the Vietnam era, we now have compasses coming out that are less like this, but more like this again, especially for the military. And these compasses were made by several different companies throughout the 60s and 70s. This is one of them, and this one was manufactured by Waltham Precision, and this is a 260. So this was made in the second month of 1960. And it is the same type of Lancet compass that you see made by Kamenga today, which was the last company that made these and still manufactures them today. But several companies began manufacturing these during the Vietnam War. This is just a very, very early one. And this pouch that it's in, which a lot of people say, well, that's a first aid pouch. Well, it actually has two lines on here of usages under the same stock number. One of them is first aid pouch. The other one is compass pouch. So this was used with this style compass during Vietnam. There were some other cases, I think, that came after that as well. But this is very much like the Kamengas that we see today. It has the magnifying glass that you can see the bezel ring in, and it's marked in mils and degrees. It has a movable bezel ring on top of it. It's a little cloudy now because it's so old, but it does still operate. And it has a flat square housing now as opposed to the round housings from before, so that now it can be laid on top of a map, laid on grid lines, laid on route planning lines and things like that, and give you very, very accurate readings for both navigation and calling for fire. But this type compass became also a standard for the outdoors because of its accuracy. Now, we don't teach with this type compass at the Pathfinder School because I find it easier to teach students on the more modern type compasses like an orienteering compass, like this one would be, with the mirror on them like the Sunto MC2 and things like that you see nowadays. But this flat base plate compass back in the early 60s actually developed about the same time that these developed for the military. So you kind of had a parallel development of compasses for the outdoors and for the military, and both of them kind of crossed over because some modern military units today, or even within the last 20 years, have used the Silva style box compass with the mirror that flips up, and a lot of them still use the Kamenga, of course, to this day. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a history, I guess, of compasses throughout the 20th century, the different styles of compasses that have been used. We really didn't go into anything past the 60s and 70s. These type compasses, I saw these advertised even up to the 70s. I think one of the ads that I have is for maybe these three styles and this one from 1971 that I'm going to put in this video. It had all four of these compasses advertised on the page in 1971. This one was made by Silva at that point, but the rest of these are the same. All right, guys, so that was just a quick overview of the different styles of compasses that have been used throughout the 20th century by Woodsman. Again, the most popular brands nowadays probably are Silva, Sunto, Brunton, and a lot of those flip type compasses are available. And then as well, you have the Kamenga military style Linsetic compass. But what you have to realize is that I think during that mid-century period, from probably the 50s and 60s, that engineering style compass I showed you from 1944 was so readily available and copied by different Japanese companies and sold under different manufacturers' names or OEM'd into different marketplaces, that was probably one of the most popular Woodsman style compasses that you would have seen during that day. That probably would have been the type of compass that your grandfather or your father would have had back in that time period. The rest of them are a little bit more obscure, other than things like the Marbles, which was readily available. The Silva Huntsman was pretty readily available back then. But as far as a compass that you carried to actually navigate with and use, it was probably that engineering style Linsetic compass, probably not the base plate style, unless it was something like the Boy Scouts of America. Most of the books that I see written in the time period have that Linsetic style compass in pictures and drawings, or just a normal flip style watch compass like the one I showed you before from 1910 that has just the degree readings on the outside, no movable bezel, and just an arrow that points north and 4 directions and 4 sub-cardinal directions on the inside plate of the compass itself. I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, for our business, a lot of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.